Cancun. 1.5 million Canadians visit Mexico every year, drawn by the sun and the sand. Tens of thousands of them come here to the heart of the Mexican Riviera. They fly into Cancun International Airport, making it one of the busiest in the Caribbean. A number of Canadian airlines fly this lucrative route, including Air Transat. Flight 5471 goes every Sunday between Cancun and Alberta. Travel time non-stop is about 5 hours and 15 minutes. While it's sold as a Transat flight, it's actually operated by Flair Air, a small charter service based in Kelowna, BC. Last spring, something odd happened with some of these flights. Sunday, May 18th, barely 90 minutes after it took off returning to Edmonton, Flight 5471 was unexpectedly diverted to New Orleans. Now, a plane being diverted in flight is not all that unusual, except the same thing happened the very next week, this time to Kansas City. And then it happened again the week after that. Flight 5471, again diverted, again apparently unexpectedly. In fact, there was nothing at all unexpected about these diversions. Sources tell CBC News they were planned well in advance, an elaborate deception of both aviation authorities and passengers. Those sources all asked to remain anonymous.
What we do is we file the flight plan starting from Cancun to Edmonton, but we do not take enough fuel which is required to go to Edmonton.
Why, when Flair was hired by Air Transat to fly from Cancun to Edmonton, would it file a flight plan it knew in advance it was not going to follow? Could it be to maintain the illusion of a non-stop flight, a flight that's more popular and more expensive for travelers? Air Transat told CBC they didn't promote these flights as non-stop, but look at these internal emails obtained by CBC News. These ones are from Captain Harold Knopp, Flair's Director of Flight Operations, to Flair pilots. In them, Knopp explains that Mexican authorities will not allow flights to Canada to stop along the way to refuel. In aviation, these are known as tech or technical stops. The problem for Flair is that, unlike Air Transat's planes, Flair's 737-400s don't have the range to go all the way from Cancun to Edmonton with a full complement of passengers and cargo, according to Flair's own pilots. So, in order to allow Flair's planes to land and refuel along the way, Knopp's emails reveal a detailed scheme to deceive Mexican authorities. Flair pilots were told to file an official flight plan that showed a flight from Cancun to Edmonton, and then, once airborne, preferably outside Mexican airspace, the pilots were told to request a diversion to New Orleans.
We lie on the flight plan. We give them a wrong route, which we are not going to follow. We give them a wrong information of our destination. And we do not take enough fuel to fly the flight plan as per the requirement.
Flight documents filed by Flair and given to the pilots instruct them to make sure they don't load the amount of fuel filed on what is referred to as the bogus plan. The documents which we've obtained also show the weight on board this flight was significantly understated on the flight plan. Sources tell CBC this scheme is referred to inside Flair as the Mexican game. But not all the players know the game is being played. Knopp's emails explain passengers aren't to be told prior to boarding that their flight is going to be diverted. They won't find that out until after the plane is in the air. In fact, the pilots are told exactly what to say in the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, it says, I would like to inform that we will be required to land in New Orleans to take on additional fuel. We apologize for this delay and inconvenience. Knopp warns the pilots not to stray from that script. Air Transat, Knopp writes, has advised us that this method has worked successfully and without any issues with previous operators. That suggests Air Transat not only knew about this, they actively encouraged the practice. In fact, an email from Mauricio Diaz, Air Transat's manager of commercial operations, actually spells it out. We always need to file a direct flight, Cancun to Edmonton. Never file Cancun, New Orleans, Edmonton because it will be refused by Mexican authorities. When the flight is airborne from Cancun, you can plan the technical stop in New Orleans and advise air traffic control. If you have any questions, please let us know. Knopp adds in his email, there was no negative passenger reaction in these situations. Some posts on travel forums by people claiming to be Flair passengers complained about this happening with other Flair flights to Mexico. It was advertised as non-stop from my travel agent, one person wrote about a Flair flight from Kelowna to Cancun. The crew on board described it as non-stop and made a point of telling the entire plane they normally made it without the stop. The crew said the stopovers were due to headwinds, runway length, and passenger load. We asked Flair about the Mexican game. Flair told us to talk to Air Transat. In a series of emails, Air Transat told us for the 3 flights from Cancun to Edmonton in the spring of 2016, operational constraints forced us to schedule a refueling stop during the flight. Passengers were informed of this on their electronic travel documents. Transat also told us refueling stops were not planned for any of the other flights. In all the cases when a scheduled or unscheduled technical stop had to be added, the passengers were informed. Mexican authorities were also notified of a change in our flight route. Such situations were relatively rare during the winter season. But from January 28th until April 8th, we found 11 straight Air Transat return flights from Cancun that failed to make it back to their original departure city of Kelowna without a stop. 9 of those flights landed in Regina. All of them were operated by Flair. Air Transat would not say whether passengers were informed in advance that those flights would be stopping on the way. Air Transat also refused to answer any questions regarding pilots being told to file plans for a non-stop flight when they knew they'd be stopping. And Air Transat also refused to comment on whether it had told previous operators to do the same thing. As for what Flair called those bogus flight plans on the Mexican flights, Transport Canada says it was notified of unscheduled stops by Flair Air chartered by Air Transat. Transport Canada reviewed the occurrences, and no further action was required. Here's the thing. We talked to Mexican aviation officials. They told us there is no rule that precludes a tech stop on flights from Mexico, which means as far as Mexico is concerned, there is no reason for Air Transat and Flair to be playing the Mexican game. So why do it? Is it possible that the airlines actually didn't understand the rule and believed they weren't allowed to plan a stop en route? Or was it all just a way to fool people into buying what they thought was a non-stop ticket? Because again, non-stop tickets are more popular, easier to sell, and often cost more than flights with stops. Whatever the reason, there were passengers who thought they were buying one thing and they received another. The pilots were uncomfortable with the deception. The regulators are aware of it but say there's nothing to be done. And in the end, it's the paying public who end up losing out. Aaron Saltzman, CBC News, Toronto.